Hello, and welcome to Born to Dance, the podcast from Matthew Bourne's New Adventures that explores and questions why dance moves, inspires, and excites us. My name is Paul Smethurst, resident artist for New Adventures and your host. Each week, I will be joined by members of our extended family to talk about their journey through dance and how it has impacted their lives. It is almost impossible, when thinking about dance, not to think about music. Influential choreographer George Balanchine famously said that dance is music made visible. And certainly this beautiful alchemy of two art forms powerfully defines the work of Matthew Bourne's New Adventures. Our guest today has a magical gift of breathing life into the music that the dancers embody. He is a renowned conductor and musical director whose international career, specialising in classical and contemporary dance, is underpinned by his deeply sensitive understanding of the relationship between composition and choreography. From his debut with Opera New Zealand in 1993, he has gone on to work with an astonishing number of acclaimed dance companies, and in 2013, he was made an associate artist of New Adventures in recognition of his artistic contribution to the company. Brett Morris, welcome to Born to Dance.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's very nice of you to ask me, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
It's such a pleasure to have you with us today. How are you?
Well, I'm actually pretty good. I've got through the lockdown, as we all have, and very much looking forward to getting back into live performance.
Yes, and can you give us a little insight into the next time you're going to be conducting? Is it with us?
Indeed. Well, we have a season of Nutcracker coming up very shortly, and so I'll be conducting most of the performances of that at Sadler's Wells. This is a long-delayed production because we were to be doing it last Christmas, and so in fact the preparation for it began about 3 years ago. So it's nice to actually finally have a chance to do it, and of course it's a familiar piece to me. I mean, I've obviously done it in many different versions, but certainly Matt's version I think I must have done first in 2001, 2002, something like that. So it will be nice to come back to it after a gap of, I think, 10 years. I think we did in 2011, actually.
Yeah, it's just such an exciting thought to think that we're going to have live performance happening again. How do you feel about being back in the pits?
I think there has to be a certain amount of adrenaline in order to really focus and concentrate and to give an energised performance. Of course, it's a 2-year gap, really. I mean, we just finished doing the Red Shoes at Sadler's Wells, and then the pandemic struck. So I've had that's a long gap, 2 years, really. So, yes, I think it will be a little bit strange. I hope I can remember what to do.
I have no doubts about that.
And we've got a very nice group of players together for this season, a lot of people we've worked with for many, many years. And we have a good rapport, both socially but also musically, which is absolutely crucial. And they're a very responsive group of players, which is, of course, important in all music, but particularly in dance, where they can't hear what's going on. And I'm the sort of conduit between the stage and the musicians. So it will be nice to see familiar faces and to play one of the most wonderful scores that Tchaikovsky has written.
It truly is. We are going to get stuck into your work with our company and your work conducting dance in a few moments. But to kick things off, we're going to backtrack a little bit. And I'm going to ask you this question. When was the last time you danced?
Oh, well, now, you'd have to go back quite a long way for that. Yes, I've always been rather self-conscious. And indeed, at school, we had formal dances that we had to learn, things like the Velita and the Maxina and all this sort of thing. And I always used to take refuge playing the piano for these things so I could escape having to do them. I've never really enjoyed that form of expression myself. I'm admiring of those who have the skill to do it and feel confident doing it. I think for me, it's never really been a place of great confidence. So I have been reluctantly dragged up on dance floors at things like weddings and and that, but I'm more of a wallflower when it comes to dancing. I appreciate other people doing it, obviously, and I spend a lot of my life, and have spent a lot of my life, around people who do it very well. So the last time would be about 6 or 7 years ago at a wedding.
Okay.
When I'd had too much to drink.
That certainly helps, loosen us up, doesn't it? So you said that there was dancing at your school. Take us back to that time. So you grew up in Auckland, did you, in the 70s?
Well, a child of the 60s. I was born in 65 in Auckland. And, I mean, we did have these sort of enforced dance lessons, certainly at primary school and intermediate school.
I have to admit, you said two dance forms that I don't even know what they are.
Ah, okay.
So are they sort of...
Sort of formal dances, sort of like, if you think of like sort of Scottish country dancing, or you think of dancing that has a formal pattern to it, and you have to learn the sequence. And
yes, we would have a barn dance. That would be the
exactly.
English equivalent, I guess.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So we had those. We learnt them originally. Actually, it's all coming back now. We learnt them to a gramophone record, but the gramophone record, of course, was rather inflexible. So I remember, because I was already playing the piano a lot by that stage, I remember whoever was taking us for these dancing lessons saying, could you play? Do you think you could play this? Because we want to be able to start and stop, and it was a faff with the record and all that. Mm-hmm. So I did. And I was greatly relieved that I could stop having to try to remember this complicated series of steps, and I could play the piano, which was a big refuge of mine right throughout my childhood. So I could sort of do what I felt I was doing best, and watch other people sort of falling over.
And would you say then that was perhaps one of your earliest encounters of that synergy between dance and music, like, and your involvement in that, your contribution towards that?
I suppose if I'd never thought of it like that, but certainly in terms of my involvement with it, that would have actually been true. Yeah,
I still think that you offered up your amazing talents to just get out of dancing.
That's absolutely right. I did. I was very pleased to be relegated to the sidelines. Yeah.
And how brilliant that now your career is shaping and providing that music that people dance to, almost like you were doing back then. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got into conducting?
Yeah, I mean, I was always going to be a musician. There was never really any question about that. And I started quite young, and my father was a pianist, and he encouraged me in that. I was encouraged by my teachers at school. And one of my teachers ran a local youth orchestra, conducted a local youth orchestra, and she asked me if I would play Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue with the youth orchestra. And I suppose I would have been about 13, maybe, something like that. And I played that because I went along to all the rehearsals, and that was like a door opening to a different area of possibility. So I asked if I could assist her. So I started working with kids like myself, doing sectional rehearsals and covering her. And then she said, well, we've got a concert coming up. Would you like to conduct something? I said, I'd love to. And of course, when you're very young, you don't know what you don't know. So I went ahead and did it. I wanted to have some conducting lessons. So I approached somebody, of course, in New Zealand as a whole, but even in Auckland, there wasn't much of a professional music scene. So there were very few people to approach. But I approached a man called Juan Mateucci, who had been the conductor of the National Orchestra and had a very important international career, particularly in the field of opera. And he sort of took me under his wing. And eventually I sort of got my main conducting break through him, because I was covering him in a season of Lucia di Lammermoor, the opera by Donizetti, and he became rather ill in the week before the opening, and I had covered all the rehearsals, and I stepped in, and things just sort of unfolded. I feel that quite a bit in my life, that I haven't necessarily set out to do something, but things have come my way, and I've often been very fortunate in that, actually.
I think it's really beautiful that you tell that story, that it was actually a teacher that maybe saw that potential in you, or it was perhaps a sliding doors moment into an offering into a different direction? Please excuse my ignorance, but is conducting something that you studied as a sort of, at a university or something like that, or was it very much a shadowing, mentoring? Do you sort of learn as you go? Could you tell us a bit?
Well, you do learn as you go. As I say, I studied privately with Juan, and then I came to London to study with an eminent British conductor called Norman Del Mar. So then I studied at the Royal College as well. I studied conducting as my first study and piano accompaniment as my second study. So it was a combination of both things, of mentoring and watching and learning and actually being taught. But you really learn by doing it. It's the hardest thing in that way, because you can't go home and practice. And so it's a rather hair-raising business. And of course, you learn by your mistakes. So that's what we all do. And that can be quite difficult. And thankfully, musicians were very patient with me and still are. It's an ongoing developmental process, I think.
And a huge responsibility as well. And I'd never thought about how potentially exposing it is to be that, like you said, that conduit. I love that word, that conduit between the two things, between the stage and the orchestra. And I'm really intrigued how you ended up conducting for dance. Is that something that you thought would be in your future, or is something perhaps that you learned or studied? Because your first job was for opera. So could you tell us a little bit about that kind of transition into that relationship with dance as a form?
Yeah, well, actually, to go back a bit further, my first two professional jobs were working in theatre. There were two professional theatre companies in Auckland. One was called Theatre Corporate and one was called Mercury Theatre. And Mercury Theatre did musicals as well as straight plays, and they also took over the functioning of the National Opera Company when it went bankrupt. So I think that's quite important, because it's about being drawn to working collaboratively in the theatre. That's been the direction that I got into quite early, and I've stayed in because it has felt the right sort of place for me. When I lived in New Zealand, conducted for the Royal New Zealand Ballet, but only one thing, I did a gala evening. I mean, I must have been mad to have said yes, because you will know that's the most difficult thing for any conductor to do. You've got excerpts from maybe 15 or 20 different pieces and all those pas de deux. And I mean, thank goodness I knew nothing about it, because it was rather terrifying. That's all I'd really done. When I came to England as a student, the way I paid my way through college was playing for dance classes. And once again, I didn't really know anything about it. I'd had a couple of introductions, so I went to London Contemporary Dance School and London Contemporary Dance Theatre and a few other places, and I just sort of learnt on the job for doing that. And I was always quite good at improvising. And I once again, I had very patient people who were teaching classes who'd been around for years, people like Ronnie Emblin and Anita Young and Brenda Last, people who'd worked with the Royal for years and just knew how to translate actually dance into music. My first job was at Northern Ballet, then was known as Northern Ballet Theatre, and then through Ian Webb, who used to be a ballet master for Matt's company, I was playing for freelance classes for him. He said, "Oh, you must come and work for our company." So I did, and that's how I met Etta. Etta Murfitt, for those who don't know, is Associate Artistic Director of New Adventures. And I said, if you ever need anyone to conduct, she said, well, give us your CV.
Serendipity or fate, we'll never know. But you used to play for company class. I never knew that.
Yeah.
I feel like I missed out on that, Brett. What kind of music would you play for company class?
Well, the company class could have been ballet or contemporary, and so it would be very. I used to improvise everything. I know lots of ballet pianists just like tunes, and companies where you're doing class every day, people like tunes that they can sing along to and things like that. But I always felt it never really served the dance very well. So I like to watch the setting of the exercise or hear the setting of the exercise and think about what would match, or what would be a nice counterpoint. and just to try to make it as interesting as possible. And I suppose that's probably why any skills I've developed in that area have developed, because of watching and listening and trying to intuitively, I think, to some degree, make the two work together.
I just want to say thank you for that beautiful insight into class accompanists, because it's something that people might not think about, and I think it is such a skill. What was the first piece of dance that you conducted? Can you remember what that was?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, apart from that mishmash of that gala in Wellington, yes, it would have been Swan Lake, Christopher Gable's production of Swan Lake in Sheffield on a midweek matinee. I can remember it very well, because there was an opening coming up there, and I'd applied for it. It was as a staff conductor, which meant actually you'd conduct 2 or 3 shows a week, and you'd play piano for all the rehearsals, and you'd play class 2 or 3 times a week. So it was a very busy job, a great way to learn a lot about dance, obviously. So I'd applied for that, and I'd played for class, and I played for some rehearsals. That had all gone well. I'd played for the then music director, John Price Jones, and he was happy with my work. So they said, well, we better see you conduct something. Do you know Swan Lake? And I said, of course. I'd never conducted it. I didn't know it at all, but I wasn't going to say that, obviously. So I said, yes, of course. And so they gave me a matinee to conduct in Sheffield. I hastily learned Swan Lake, on the days when you'd get a video of the production, you'd learn it from the video. And then with no rehearsal, you'd just go and do the show. And that's what I did. And anyhow, it must have been good enough, because they offered me the job after that.
It makes my palms sweat just thinking about you in that position. And then you found your way to our family, which we're so grateful for, and have conducted Swan Lake many times. And I have been one of the swans that have danced to your wonderful conducting. You were playing as an accompanist and then offered your services as a conductor. And how did that begin? Like, how does that happen? Did you have to have a meeting with Matthew? How does it kind of come into being?
I'm sure it's different for everybody. All I know is that I received a phone call from David Frame, who was the founder musical director of Matthew's company, saying, now I've got your CV and we're looking for someone to do the last 2 weeks of the tour. Would you be interested? I mean, you could have knocked me over with a feather. Would I be interested? Of course I'd be interested. And of course I'd seen the company do Swan Lake at the Piccadilly, and I was completely blown away by it. So the idea that I'd actually get a chance to conduct it was extraordinary. So I said, yes, absolutely. So I did those last 2 weeks of the tour. Very sadly, David Frame was very unwell at that stage, and he died shortly after. And the Swan Lake was going into the Dominion for a short London run, maybe 4 weeks or something like that, 6 weeks. And so the company asked if I'd do that, which I did. I never thought that by doing Swan Lake it would lead to anything. I just was grateful to do it, and I must have done it reasonably well enough, and I enjoyed getting on with people. Very nice, very lovely company, which is not always the case in dance. It's a very demanding art form, and people can be very highly strung, and there's a lot of pressure, and it can make people not be at their best. And that was never the feeling in this company. It never has been. So I was very fortunate. So that was 1999, 2000, and I've been with the company ever since.
And we're so fortunate to have you, and you bring such a depth of that understanding. And for me, having danced to the music that you've conducted, there really is this sensitivity and responsiveness to your conducting. And I was thinking before we had this conversation about that relationship between the dancer on stage and the music, but particularly the conductor. I think naively, when I came into the industry, I just thought the orchestra would play the music and we would dance. And then from touring and performing many times, you start to understand what a magician I think the conductor is, and you feel that synergy, that alchemy, that relationship, that interplay. And I can almost feel you being with us. And it's such a beautiful thing. I wonder if you could just touch on that and paint that picture. What does it mean to you to conduct for dance and that relationship between dance and music?
Well, it's a really big question and an interesting one, I think. One of the roles is that you're a conduit between what's happening on stage and what's happening in the pit. So that's one of the roles. Musicians, if they're playing in a pit for any other form that involves singing or whatever, they can hear exactly what's going on. They're going to be influenced by that. Of course, that's not the case at all with dance. So someone has to emotionally communicate what is actually happening, particularly in dance theatre, which is obviously Matt's form of dance. So you have to communicate the emotional intensity of what's going on to the players so that supports the dramatic intensity of what's going on stage. Obviously, you also have to make the music sound good and be attentive to that and give the musicians your full attention and create an atmosphere where people play well together, where they're listening together, where they feel part of something together. That's a big part of it. And to keep a piece alive, particularly if you're doing multiple performances. Then there's the preparation with the dancers, which varies depending on the situation, a new piece, a revival, whether it's classical or contemporary, all that sort of thing. But for me, once I always start with learning the piece musically, because I think until you've done that, that's my sort of anchor. But then what I would do is either through attending rehearsals or looking at recordings if it's a revival, I learn the choreography as much as I can. And, obviously I haven't done dance training, but I have been around enough to be able to notate. So I notate my score. With anything where I'm going to have to pay particular attention, I mean, big group numbers or whatever, people are going to have to take that from me. But although I do need to know what to look for, if I'm thinking of elevation or if I'm thinking of something that's slower and how much time people need, but not too much time so that they're going to be uncomfortable. The more familiar with that I get, the better. And I suppose I spend a lot of time, both consciously and unconsciously, thinking about this relationship between the two things. How can I make the music fit what I'm seeing? How can I get inside the music myself and mine it for what's there? Because that's what will have inspired the choreographer. And so if we're both serving the same thing, then we're on the right track. And then of course I talk. I talk to the dancers. I will ask them about not only about technically what they need, but I will think with them about their characterization. That's something Matt and I will talk about quite a bit. And I like being in rehearsals because you pick up things and you're inspired by ideas or images come to mind, and that's all part of the process. And then I think ideally what you try to do is forget all of that when you come to the show and trust that you've done your preparation well enough that you can then get into the business of performing. Which is sort of bringing the whole thing together. The conductor really can make or break things, and I don't just mean in terms of danceable tempi or something like that. I mean in terms of the pacing of a production, in terms of where you need to take time and have a moment of stillness where people hold their breath, or where you need to really be driving towards a finale, or all that dramatic intensity. I think you have to. That's the conductor's role, really, is bringing all that together. But I think unless you've done your preparation, your homework, both musically and choreographically, it's very difficult to do that. You have to learn every note of every instrument. You have to learn all the choreography. You have to take the time it takes to have that internalized in a way that it's there and you don't need to be consciously thinking about it or worrying about it or whatever, because that will completely get in the way.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an exercise in being completely present as well. So like you said, you've done all that preparation, but then you're there in the moment and you're reacting or responding, perhaps is a better word, to what is happening before your eyes. Are there any examples of where that has really caught you off guard, or you've found that challenging or exciting? Is it always different every time?
The ideal would be it's always different. That you have a format, you have a structure. The aim is that you're trying to give yourself over to a process of performing. So inevitably that's going to be different. Just learning it, the whole phenomenon of performance is fascinating, actually. You know, you can do something in the studio and everyone can be happy, and if you do that in the performance, no one will be happy. And that's the same for musicians as well. So it is about doing your preparation and then being free and having enough flexibility. And I think for me, when I've enjoyed working with dancers the most, it's been collaborative, and I mean in the moment. So it's not that the conductor is following the dancer necessarily, and it's not that the dancer's following the conductor. The most rewarding thing is when there's a spontaneity, and that's of course what happens with the musicians too. When I started my conducting career, I thought it was all about directing, showing people what you wanted and laying down the law. Now of course some of that is important, but actually most of it is not about that, I've realised. It took me a long time to learn that lesson. It's about listening to other people and facilitating them within a structure to spontaneously give their best. And I think that's the same with the dancers too. So when I've had the good fortune of working with what I would say musical dancers, people who listen to the music and can hear things and can respond, that's for me that's a very satisfying experience. And it's very interesting when you see people who've only ever worked to recorded music encounter live music. It can be absolutely terrifying for them. You can see that you know, they're used to hearing something in a very set way, and no matter how good it is. And it's very interesting to watch people develop, like when we did the tour of Romeo and Juliet in 2019, where we had live music everywhere and young people coming and being part of that. I would say most of those young people had never worked with live musicians before. You'd see by the end of a week of performances, they'd shifted. They'd really grown and developed, and liking the fact that there was some flexibility.
Absolutely agree. And I'm so excited for people to listen and to just understand a little bit more about that whole process. So, we ask all of our guests about the most impactful piece of dance that they've seen. And you mentioned Pina Bausch's 1980. Can you paint the picture? Where were you when you watched it? What is it about this piece that made you choose it for us today?
I mean, it's hard to know where to begin with it because it is such a classic and it's such a big piece. I mean, it's 4 hours long. And it was made in 1980, shortly after Pina Bausch had lost her partner. So it has a very melancholic, bittersweet quality that suffuses the whole piece, I think. But it's also extraordinarily funny and diverting, but absolutely grounded in humanity. I think that's one of the really strong characteristics of her work, about what it is to be a person, from all sorts of different angles. And there's not actually a lot of pure dance in it. So it is this combination of movement and drama, which takes you, I think, on an incredible emotional journey. In a way, sort of through the lifespan. It starts off in a very sort of infantile place and puts you in touch with the foibles of humanity as we grow and develop. And I found it incredibly moving. I've only seen it live once. It's not done very often for obvious reasons. It's a long piece. The stage has to be covered in green grass. I just think it is quite extraordinary. And one of the things that's also quite extraordinary in it is that there are still a handful of, I think, about 4 people who were in the original production in 1980 who still have performed in it. And when I saw it in 2014 at Sadler's Wells, 4 of them were still in it, which I think is I think there's something I'm quite tearful sort of thinking of it. People who've spent their whole life doing something really well. Yeah, it's a very moving thing, I think, to see artists performing. I had the same reaction when I went to see the Paco Peña Company. I remember that, just thinking, these are people who spent their whole life doing this really well.
And I think that's what's so special about that company, is that they break down that perception of who can be a dancer, whatever that label means. And I think that is a real thing that we really like to celebrate on this podcast, is that dance is for everybody. And no matter what your age is, or, and you're talking about people that have lived and breathed it for their whole lives, and they are still able to be given that opportunity to share this innate gift that they have with everybody.
Well, and that it's got better. It's about a maturation. So you're often revisiting pieces over and over and over again, and finding something new, finding something deeper, which I think is quite remarkable, that you can have done something many times and suddenly you hear something new, or you see something new, or something, a penny drops, that something falls into place that you hadn't seen before. And, I think that's the essence of live performance, is the spontaneous way that happens.
I can really resonate with that. I have done Matthew Swan Lake, I think 5 tours. I couldn't even count how many times I've danced that piece. And the remarkable thing is that every time it's different, and every time I come to it and discover something new. And that is the beauty of live performance, really. And growing as an artist, and learning more about yourself as a human being, and then bringing that, to what you do, and finding a deeper connection with it, and an authenticity, I think, that you have off stage that you can bring on stage. Yep. So we are going to slightly change pace and talk about music, which we have been doing all podcasts, but we have asked you to let us know what your favourite piece of music is to dance to. Now, we obviously said at the beginning that dancing is not your favourite thing, so I can't wait to hear where and when you dance to this piece. You chose I Won't Dance by Jerome Kern and Dorothy Fields, played by the Oscar Peterson Trio, and we're going to just listen to a little clip of it now. I'm really intrigued about a few things. Firstly, when do you dance to this piece of music? I'm trying to imagine it. I know you very well, and I'm like, I want to see it.
I'll spare you that, Paul. No, this is the question that terrified me the most, because I really feel terribly unconfident and self-conscious about dancing. So I thought I wanted to choose something that had some sort of meaning for me, even though it's not something I would dance to. And I chose it because obviously the title, I Won't Dance, and it's a wonderful piece, Jerome Kern, Dorothy Fields. But also Oscar Peterson, who was one of my great heroes. When I was a teenager, I was very interested in jazz piano and as well as classical. I did both. And my father was a great pianist and very interested in Oscar Peterson's work. And I just thought the combination of me trying to play like Oscar Peterson and not dance was probably far more accurate than anything else I could give you.
Okay, I'll take it. Do you think there's anything to do with the fact that you work so consistently with professional dancers that do it for a career that makes you feel slightly alienated from that? Or
no, I wouldn't say so, because I think actually most of the dancers I've worked with are so lovely. I think it really just goes a very, very long way back for me. As a child, I was deeply self-conscious and not in a pleasant way and felt very uncomfortable with myself. So, I stopped eating anchovies when I was 40 because I thought sophisticated people ate anchovies and I hated them. And by the time I turned 40, I thought, I don't have to eat anchovies anymore. And now I realise I don't have to dance. I don't have to, other people can take care of the dancing. I'll do something else.
Brilliant, beautiful. And this podcast is called Born to Dance, and it's about the love of dance. And I
love dance.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
that's why.
I love it.
That's why you're here, and that's why we want to hear from you, because there's a spectrum, isn't there, of how we can love dance and how we can engage with dance. Absolutely. And in my role as resident artist, I am constantly searching for different ways that people can participate and engage with dance. And recently I've been really thinking about, what does engagement with dance mean? And I don't think it always means having to do it. I think there's something about the act of sitting and watching, especially live dance, that is so transformative. And listen, if Brett Morris is happy to conduct for dance or sit and watch dance, then that's a beautiful thing.
And learn about it. I think it's a really interesting art form, hugely diverse, huge range of things to learn about and to understand. And I think engagement could mean any number of those things.
We're going to move on to a bit of a quick fire round to close. That was a groan, everybody. It's going to be fine. A quick fire round, Brett, to close us off for today's episode. And we're starting with a bit of a word association. So I'm going to say the name of a Matthew Bourne show, and I'd like you to say the first word that comes into your head without thinking. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Swan Lake.
Feathers.
Carman.
Garage.
Edward Scissorhands.
Topiary.
Cinderella.
War.
Nutcracker.
Sweetyland.
Romeo and Juliet.
Young Love.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And following on from that, if you could turn any story, film or book into a Matthew Bourne production, what would you pick?
Right. Now, I should have thought about this because I know you've asked other guests, but I haven't actually given it any thought at all.
No, that's good. That's why it comes into our quickfire round.
Well, I just suddenly had a thought about Remains of the Day, actually. Something very small and tortured and expression, full of expression, maybe.
Okay, interesting. What music would there be?
Well, I think Terry would have to write the music.
Okay, Terry, if you're listening.
He's very good at evoking atmosphere. Yeah, I think something, very deeply painful about that story, and it could be very evocative.
I think it's so interesting when you look at the breadth of Matthew's work, and he really plays between almost two sides of a coin, or two ends of a spectrum.
Well, he's also often preoccupied with people who are on the periphery and who don't necessarily fit in and can't find a straightforward way into anything. You could see that in just about every piece.
Absolutely.
And I could see part of that as being quite important.
What is one piece of advice you would give to the next generation wanting to get into the arts industry?
Well, if I was just trying to think about my situation, I suppose that I never said no to anything and worked really hard. Go for everything, anything that comes your way. You never know where it'll lead. I certainly couldn't have foreseen any of this. But I've always worked really, really hard, and I think there's no substitute for that. And I think if you don't want to do that, do something else, because there's no point in doing it. I think hard work is quite essential.
Thank you. If you could pass on the love of dance to somebody or a group who may not have the chance to experience it, who would it be and why?
I think any young people who might not ordinarily come across dance. I was one of those young people. I hadn't apart from we talked about the sort of formal dances that I was taught at school, but in terms of actual dance performance, I was exposed to it through a contemporary dance company that had only been formed a couple of years, that did a lot of theatre and education stuff, and which was a very new school and a small school. They performed in the gymnasium. That was the only space we had. And that, it's not that my career in dance has flowed from that, as you understand, but it opened up a possibility that had never previously existed, that people could actually do that people actually made their living dancing, and that it took you into something, a completely different realm inside yourself. And so I think if anyone can be exposed, I would say to any of the arts, but we're thinking about dance, and young people can be exposed that wouldn't ordinarily have the chance to be exposed, I couldn't think of anything better than that.
That is the most beautiful place to wrap up our conversation. Thank you so much for being a gorgeous guest and incredibly interesting and insightful.
Thank you very much for asking me, Paul. I've enjoyed it.
If you enjoyed this episode, then please go check out our other episodes, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Acast, and YouTube. If you want to know more about New Adventures, then check out the links in our show notes. I have been your host, Paul Smethurst. This series has been produced by Hattie Moyer, and our researcher is Stephen Daly. The theme music is by Terry Davies from the production Play Without Words. For more information about the additional music in this episode, please check the show notes. This has been Born to Dance, brought to you by New Adventures. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Bye for now.